Hello and welcome to the WellCare Podcast by Citius Retreats. My name's George Bownes and I'm a sports and exercise medicine consultant and founder of Citius Retreats.
And I'm Nicola Graham, a strategy advisor in human performance.
So before we get into today's show, here's a few words from our kind sponsor, IBSA. Osteoarthritis is the leading cause of pain and disability in the UK. As our bodies age, there is a loss of naturally occurring hyaluronic acid within our joints, which can lead to reduced shock absorption and lubrication. This can contribute to the development of osteoarthritis, resulting in joint pain, stiffness, and difficulty carrying out daily activities, such as going to work and exercising. Synovial HL is a joint injection with the highest concentration of hyaluronic acid available in the UK, effectively restoring hyaluronic acid in the joint. It is scientifically proven to reduce pain and increase joint function, preserving your joint into the future. Synovial HL is injected in a simple procedure which offers an alternative to medication and surgery. If you'd like to find out more, please visit synovial.co.uk for full product information and a list of clinics offering synovial HL injections. Synovial. Move freely, live fully. Disclaimer. The procedure must be carried out by an appropriately trained healthcare professional.
Hi, and welcome to the WellCare Podcast. In this episode, we are joined by Lauren Windas, co-founder of ARDERE, and nutritional therapist, naturopath and author. ARDERE is a holistic wellbeing company that comprises of a private expert-led wellness clinic as well as a collection of natural self-care products aimed at elevating your wellbeing. Lauren founded ARDERE to share her passion for healthy living, which stems from her own personal health struggles with chronic fatigue syndrome following a viral infection at university. This was the inspiration behind Lauren's debut book, Chronic Fatigue Syndrome: Your Route to Recovery. And this is how she supports clients in her one-to-one clinic. Lauren wishes to educate, support and inspire people, and her approach to wellbeing promotes an approach to life that defends against stress, anxiety and illness. This allows people to emerge as a healthier and happier person by consistently evolving and learning about health and the ways that they can empower themselves to enhance quality of life and longevity. So Lauren, thank you for joining us today. And what does wellness mean to you?
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys. So I thought, when I was kind of thinking about this, for me, I'd say, well, you could very much put it simply and say, wellness is kind of the state of being in good health, but that just oversimplifies it. Because for me, I think it's really fostering and living a good quality of life. And I'd say it's not just the absence of illness, but really the presence of, vitality, energy, good sleep, but also like a deep sense of purpose as well. So having good relationships, feeling fulfilled in terms of what you're doing day to day. And really, I'd say wellness is kind of a dynamic process of continuous growth, really where you're kind of investing in yourself in terms of self-care, in terms of you're always growing and having wider connection with yourself and also the environment around you. So put it simply, people could just oversimplify it, but there's so much more to it than that.
There's loads of different dimensions, aren't there? And it's really interesting with the guests that we've spoken to that there's usually been like a pivotal point or an inflection point in their life that has really made wellness their focus at that point as well. And as we've kind of alluded to in the intro, that there was that health event that happened for yourself. We don't need to go into kind of like real detail around that, but was wellness on your radar before that, or was that a real kind of shift or a pivot within your life?
Yeah, so for me, I became unwell when I was 19, so I was just going into my second year at university. So it probably wasn't the time where, you're really kind of thinking about your health. You're almost kind of just thinking about fun. So I was like going into my second year. I remember it being Freshers Week, or just Freshers Week had finished for that second year we were going into. And it was just all about like meeting people, socializing, partying. So it definitely wasn't on the radar. Although that being said, I would have kind of seen myself as maybe a quote unquote healthy person. When I compared myself to all of my like friends at uni and the people that I was living with, nobody was cooking meals from scratch. I was, although I would look back now and actually say they weren't the healthiest types of homemade meals, but I was cooking for myself and I wasn't eating ready meals and things like that. To kind of tell you a little bit of the story, I obviously caught this viral infection and I remember it just being a classic case of never been well since. So I remember basically, I think I kind of cleared the acute symptoms of, kind of the stuffy nose, the kind of head coldy stuff. And because I'd actually been sent home from Newcastle University to take some antibiotics by a doctor actually for this viral infection, rested up, and then came back thinking I was over it, but I just never felt right since after that. And I had all kinds of cognitive symptoms, from brain fog to severe fatigue, digestive issues. And I'd never really had the best gut in the first place. I'd always had a few digestive niggles prior to that, but then they got a little bit worse. So it kind of spiraled, and it was just there. I was unable to get out of bed in the morning, and I experienced post-exertional malaise, which is feeling worse upon exertion. So that kind of led me on this path really of, I'd say, putting the jigsaw puzzle pieces back together of what was driving my ill health. And I learned so much along the way. So to kind of, I guess there's a long way of answering your question. It wasn't on the radar, but it soon became to be, because as a result, I just couldn't live like that. And I wasn't really finding any answers as to, where I could go without having to take this into my own hands.
The other point that kind of comes up with people as well is sometimes they tried things and it didn't work for them at that point, and then they tried something different as well. Like, were you able to find what worked for you quite simply, or was it a matter of kind of trial and error and different experimentation to find what did personally work for you?
Yeah, I'd say with the kind of, well, first of all, with chronic fatigue syndrome, it is kind of a very much a snakes and ladders approach to recovery. You feel like one day you're up, the next day you're down. So I very much felt like I was trying to find my groove in terms of putting things like pacing into place, which was balancing the levels between activity and rest. But then also when it came to my diet, I mean, I was a pescatarian for 18 years, I want to say. Well, no, not 18 years, maybe about 14 years of my life prior to becoming unwell. And then I ended up introducing meat back into my diet as a result of so I made a little bit of, dietary changes. But yeah, it wasn't a simple approach, because I think with CFS, you often find that you kind of make a few steps forward and it can feel like a few steps back. Okay. So that was, it was kind of putting those jigsaw puzzle pieces back together.
Yeah, great. And so where you're at now in terms of the messaging that you're giving out to clients and to people, in simple terms, what are those clear messages, do you think?
So in terms of CFS patients, or just generally in terms of...
Just in general, and then we can maybe go down into that.
Yeah. So in general, I'd say for me, the way that I work is really kind of drilling down into the root drivers of what could be causing people's ill health. So obviously, when I'm working with somebody who's got maybe a chronic illness like post-viral fatigue, for example, it's really drilling down into what could be ultimately driving that. So we're using, for example, functional medicine and testing, for example, which is obviously data driven. That can really help. But then we put those jigsaw puzzle pieces back together in terms of pacing and diet. But really, my messaging is that it's very much a personalized approach, because everybody is different. And of course, we are all biochemically unique.
Yeah. So we've worked with a number of different organizations through the sort of Citius retreats angle, if you like. So people like We Are Genius, who are functional medicine backed, people like Detox Kitchen. What are the kind of simple first steps people can have in terms of going down more of a healthy, nutritious input kind of, pathway and journey as such?
Yeah. So one of the things I always talk to clients about, and this is, I always waffle on about this, is really kind of this analogy of a balanced plate. So if you think about how you're kind of constructing your plates in terms of, if you just want to start to make some simple changes to your diet, what I would say is think about like a palm size serving, maybe 1 to 2 if you're kind of male and you're looking to put on a little bit more muscle mass, 1 to 2 palm size servings of lean protein. It could be a source of chicken, it could be a fillet of fish, it could be some beef. And then really you want to drill down into thinking about half of your plate, so 2 fistfuls of non-starchy vegetables. So, things like your green leafies, your onions, your bell peppers, your tomatoes, your aubergines, and really thinking about as much color as possible. When it comes to carbohydrates, carbohydrates, I'd always say think about a fistful. So, slow releasing carbohydrates like sweet potatoes, brown rice, lentils, quinoa. And then when it comes to healthy fats, you want to be thinking about, 1 to 2 thumb-sized servings, as just really as a rule of thumb, which could be a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil over, a salad or something like that. It could be a crumbling of high-quality feta cheese or dairy, or some nuts and seeds. And really, it's a really good thing to start thinking about in terms of, really where your macronutrients are coming from, but making sure that ultimately half of your plate is plants. And I always talk about the Super 7, which is kind of your fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, legumes, and also herbs and spices are kind of lump into one. And really that all counts into kind of, where we get that plant intake. And also that's fiber, and fiber is fuel for your gut bacteria. So we really need that fiber in. If we think about fiber, for example, various different types of fiber have been identified, and it actually feeds those bacteria within our large intestine, so that microbiome. If we think of those fibers, the more fibers that we're getting, we think of it as like a cocktail that we're getting from our diet. The more of those that we're getting in, the more that we're feeding those different species of friendly bacteria. And as a result, studies have shown that we don't have the enzyme faculties to break down and digest fiber, but our gut bacteria do. So they break it down, they use it as fuel and food, and then they produce anti-inflammatory byproducts like short chain fats, which nurture and protect the gut lining. So thinking about more of those plants, those balanced plate analogies are just really great examples of how you can start to just think about changing your eating pattern. If, in a way of kind of making small steps. It's not about revolutionizing anything overnight, but just really trying to kind of groove your way into it.
And if you think about the clients that come to see you generally, do they come with a specific need, or is it more general, I want to improve my nutrition? And because I think it's really interesting, just even in general media, in general news around obesity, and actually there's always this conversation around, do we bring back home economics into kind of school? And obviously people will come with different needs, but do you find generally people are coming with kind of clinical health related needs, or more general, my relationship with food is either lacking or not healthy?
Yeah, I mean, a large percentage of my clients are kind of, fatigue related, and I think that's because obviously I'd written a book on this after my own journey. And of course, a lot of people are seeking support out there and really answers in terms of, where they can move forwards in their own journey. So a lot of it does tend to be kind of the post-viral category, but I also do, and I have a massive passion for working with, those clients that have problematic relationships with food. I think we are living in a very stressful food environment, a very stressful food world. So people do need that education piece around really, somebody that can actually build that relationship with them to almost kind of hold their hand and support them in terms of really understanding like what makes them tick, what's causing them to, venture back into these habits that are maybe self-sabotaging, that are maybe driving weight and metabolic problems, and of course, potentially leading to chronic disease. So I think, it does tend to be, yes, part of that category of fatigue, but also people that just really want to enhance their relationship with food and really work on improving their quality of life. And of course, there's a lot of people now talking about longevity and, enhancing not just health span, but lifespan as well. So really improving that quality of life.
Yeah, it was interesting. I went to a talk this week from a palliative care doctor who was talking about health span and really getting people around the concept that think about what you want to be doing in your 80s and then dial it back to where you are currently in your stage and age of life. And you need to be doing, in many cases, you either need to keep doing what you're doing, or you might need to do a bit more. But in many cases, it's not necessarily dialing down, because actually most people can probably do a bit more across all areas where health can be gained. And it was interesting that the conversations that then came in from the audience really around their thoughts around nutrition and the types of nutritional problems that they had in their own household. So a lot of it being around teenage eating, not just necessarily the more obvious low-hanging fruit of concerns around girls who have body weight issues. Obviously, boys have that as well, maybe to a lesser extent, but it's more well-known in girls. The other thing they were asking around was around boys who then want to put weight on, want to put size on, particularly if that's muscle mass, where that's either because they want to look better on the beach, as it were, or they've got a functional thing that they're training for, whether that's rugby or football or martial arts or whatever it is. Do you get a lot of involvement with adolescents and those adolescent questions?
No, I don't tend to see a lot of clients with, in that kind of category. I've seen a few, and actually a couple of colleagues of mine who have reported, there's a lot of kind of male body dysmorphia going on in terms of that. I think that's only kind of on the rise a little bit more now with social media and I guess that comparison side of things. But no, it's definitely something that I see, widely on the rise, but not myself personally.
No, fine. Just in general then, just coming from a nutritionist, as it were, where would you recommend signposting? Because there might be people listening who either that's applying in their household or they know people where it is affecting them, just as a kind of sensible place to start looking, really.
So in terms of kind of the disordered eating
side, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I'd recommend, there's some brilliant charities out there. Beat is one of them. And then there's also Seed, run by a friend of mine, Gemma Oaten, who's been affected by anorexia herself. But, they cover all kinds of different eating disorders, disordered eating, relationships with food issues. And then there's also the National Centre for Eating Disorders, which is where I trained. And they're fantastic as well. That's run by Deanne Jade, who is very, very knowledgeable in that field.
So coming away from that kind of clinical end, I suppose, of nutrition, we quite often talk about on the podcast and through Citius about this ability to kind of thrive in life. We don't want to just survive. We want to be aspirational to people around what kind of thriving could look like.
Yeah.
If you had to take that kind of to your own personal level, what does it look like for you?
I'd say thriving probably kind of involves, somebody that's kind of waking up. Well, for myself, I'd say if I'm waking up energized, I'm feeling clear-headed, I feel aligned with my purpose, but I also feel resilient against kind of, maybe able to kind of weather anything challenging that's happening for me. I feel like I'm on the front foot. I feel like I'm organized. And I feel like I've got a lot of positivity coming my way. So that's how I'd relate to thriving. And I think as well, sometimes, we talk about thriving, it's when you comment on like a friend or, a family member and you say that they're thriving, often they look like they're thriving. So have that glow about them, for example. They look well, they feel like there's a lot of positivity around them, but just generally it's that, I think it's kind of another synonym for wellness, really. It's that there's a lot of positivity, but, that they are, they are very energized and they've got that vital force in them.
Yeah. And that's it's so multi-dimensional, isn't it, as well? But obviously what we put into our body, be it from a food perspective, hydration, social media, relationships, that all feeds into how we are going to kind of thrive going forward or be well in the more general sense.
Yeah, and I think like all of these different areas, they all feed into each other, don't they? So, some areas, some days you've got, your health's up, but maybe other areas in your life aren't going as well, like maybe relationships, for example, or career or finances. So I think it's about evaluating all of those things, and nothing is ever perfect, but I think it's being able to help navigate those challenges in a methodical way and feeling, I think a good word for that is resilience, feeling resilient against whatever is thrown at you, and that you're able to handle that, and also having perspective on maybe if the bad things are happening to you, you're able to have perspective of the things that are good. And we talk a lot about gratitude, and I know you've talked in the past on previous podcasts about gratitude and having that perspective of the good things that have happened to you in a particular day or week. So I always talk to clients about that, because I think even obviously somebody's going through some hardships like CFS and post-viral fatigue, and they feel like life is a struggle and it can affect all those areas of their life. If we can find like one thing, that even if it's the smallest thing, like having a roof over their head or food in the fridge, that they can be grateful for, something that that is thriving in their life, even if it's one thing to zoom in on and focus on. I think it just really helps to lighten the load and and soften what's going on around them.
Yeah. And I think that really kind of feeds into the like I know on a personal level, if you're stressed, exercise might drop off, then you don't feel motivated to eat as well, but when the building blocks are in place, like one builds onto the other, and it's much easier for there to be a more holistic approach. But as soon as one drops off, it's actually it takes a much more effort to keep everything else on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it, is when it comes to like motivation. I was reading something recently about motivation kind of being this balance between pleasure and pain, and almost like this ability to endure the kind of pain side of things. But the more that we endure it, the easier it becomes and the less painful it becomes. But like, you're right, in those times of when, you know, maybe you're not feeling so great in one area of your life, then exercise feels harder, eating well feels harder. So it's trying to find the little things you can feel proud of, that I got up this morning and I did this, or, you know, I'm grateful for a roof over my head. I'm grateful for my family connections, or whatever it might be, you know, or somebody smiled at me today when I went on my walk. It could be the tiniest of things, but something that you can hold on to that just makes you feel like one area of your life is somewhat positive and thriving. And whether that comes from within or externally, I suppose it doesn't matter, does it?
I'm going to share just one personal thing before I hand over to George on this.
Yeah.
So I got as I mentioned, my 6-month-old dog was in the room with us, has now left. But for the last 4 months, I've walked her on a daily basis, multiple times a day, maybe, with no podcast, no music, just me and nature and her. And it takes me back to when my kids, who are now 8 and 6, were babies, and you notice things that generally day to day you just take for granted. You just go through life and just it's like one step after another, so you lose all that ability, I think, for mindfulness or to be present, because you're just surviving, kind of thing. And so it's actually been great to go back to just observing another thing, not a human this time, but an animal, just what they do, their curiosity, their picking up sticks, their ambition of how heavy and big those sticks can be that they can carry, or silly things like that actually make you just take a moment to slow down. Because I think that's also a theme that's come through quite a lot of the conversations, of just slow down to be able to kind of thrive and perform as well, which is a much easier to say than to actually do, but there is huge benefit to it.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I've been doing something very similar recently, of not actually taking, well, I'll have my phone in my pocket, but I won't put my earphones on, or, like you say, plug into a podcast or a video or whatever, or scroll on my phone. And like, I've just been engaging in like walking the dog, and just really being in the moment. And actually, I find that the thing that fills up my cup. And one thing I do with my clients, especially ones with fatigue, is ask them to complete like an activity diary of, what have you done in your day that is energy giving, energy neutral, or energy draining. And you can kind of really evaluate their routine in terms of what's filling up your cup, what is breaking down your cup in terms of your energy. And it's not just the physical task, it's also the cognitive, it's also the emotional and the mental. But for me, that was my one thing that I was like, actually, this is filling up my cup. And you do, like you say, you notice so many of those tiny little things that you wouldn't have noticed, even if it's just like the leaves falling, the color of the sky, you know, tiny things that you just think, it just helps you to feel refreshed and recharged. Because I think we are more and more losing our connection to nature as we're becoming more and more tech savvy, aren't we? So it's something we all need to slow down and look at the trees a bit more.
As we can see your trees, George.
Yeah.
They're not actually my personal trees, unfortunately, but that would be wonderful if they were. Yeah, no, I mean, for those listening, should we say, I'm in Greece this week at a sort of fitness and wellness week with Richie Norton, who was our first guest on the show, and Jen Greenstead as well, who's the bar coach that we used for our first retreat back in January, and a collection of many other wide practitioners from the health and fitness space. And I think it's interesting where you go to some of these groups and sessions that are on. I always like to try and do things that are a bit outside the normal, if you like, of what I would do on a day-to-day basis. And it's interesting when you listen to other people, and that's where I was saying that the question came from before, around going to listen to what a palliative care doctor was saying, and the response to the people around, and the people who also, many people who have got children, they've got busy lives. It doesn't really matter what age the children are, it's just different demand at different times, which is kind of what Nicola was saying there. Interesting. I'm godfather to a friend's baby, and she just sent me a message today to say she slept through the night for the first time. I was like, well, I remember that. That's like a big cornerstone. And we talked before with Sophie Bostock about sleep and how many people work shift patterns, and then that often has a big impact on not just physical activity, but your ability to eat and what you eat and when you eat. And there's more effort is required to plan meals or think about healthier options. So people may go through a kind of boom bust period where they eat well when they're on a daytime routine, but they go to a nighttime routine and they maybe not so much. So it's great to hear, you talking about that multidisciplinary element of life. Just going back to something we were saying this a little while ago in terms of the types of people that come to see you, but thinking about the longevity of how long you might work with somebody, and I appreciate that would vary, but what do you generally see when people are coming to you, how long they want support and what that support looks like, just so people can think about whether adding in a nutritionist rather than just some healthy eating habits would be benefit to them, really?
Yeah, so again, it all depends on the client in terms of who they are, any specific conditions or what's going on and what their goal is ultimately. If I'm talking about, somebody that's, as I say, more kind of chronic illness, they need that level of support that's kind of more detailed. I could be working with them for 6 months to a year at a minimum. But for somebody who maybe wants support with their metabolic health, their weight, their relationship with food, again, that could be a couple of months. I work off kind of packages as well. So, 3 months kind of, we'll have an introductory and then like the 3-month packages. But the 3-month are kind of where you can really drill down into getting to know that person. Because of course, the way that I work is it is all about every client's different. It's all about personalization. And how I differ is, it's not just you have 10 minutes like you would with a GP, but we really sit down and get to know each other. So it's going on that journey with each person. So for somebody weight related, relationship with food related, I'd say 3 to 6 months at a minimum. But if somebody's just looking for kind of general healthy habits, it could be between, 3 to 6 weeks or something like that. But it varies.
Yeah, sure. And when you get to the end of that process, where are people at, do you often find? Do you feel it's something where when you get to the end of that process time, whether that's 3 or 6 months, where do you think people are? Do you think they're at a point where they then want to go and try some time to work on the things you've given them? Or does it often feel that people then want to come back round at some point in the future? We talked a bit before, Nicola, around how you might try something at one stage in life, but it might not be the right stage for you to try that particular health intervention, if you like, or wellness offering.
Yeah.
Do you find that similarly with yourself?
Yeah, I can have some, like, there'll be some clients that are maybe more negatively motivated. Like, let's say you've got, the woman of the household, I'm seeing her, and then she recommends her husband. And then, he's, for example, not as engaged. He takes the sessions, he listens in the sessions, but you find he's not compliant between sessions. He's just there showing up, but he's not actually putting those things into practice. But then, I've had it happen where they've come back, let's say a year later, because they do have a goal. And actually that's a positive motivation because they are wanting to achieve something. Maybe it's training for a marathon or whatever else it might be. So yes, circumstances can change where if a client's negatively motivated and then positively motivated afterwards, and then others, it can be quite transformational. Like obviously with my fatigue clients, I've got clients who have been, as a result of post-viral fatigue and ME/CFS, have been signed off work. They've been unable to work. So with working with me, it can be a very, very invested process because of course it's their whole life. They're trying to really get back on track. And so at the end of working, I've just had 2 clients recently now back on a phased return to work, and it's going really well. And we've been able to kind of reduce those crashes. Classic hallmark of CFS and post-viral is this post-exertional malaise where they go past their threshold and then they crash, and then they're kind of paying back, it's like payback symptoms. And they're waiting for this period of convalescence just to feel better again. And then it's this vicious cycle. So a marker of recovery is ultimately having less and longer periods without crashes, essentially. And obviously that's where they're able to now get back to work. So it's really nice to see kind of that coming full circle with clients and seeing them coming back and bouncing back. But yeah, so it's interesting how you can get those different cases though with different levels of motivation and engagement levels, but it can, as I say, change when circumstances change.
Yeah. And so in that post-viral space, have you seen a bigger increase in people engaging with your services and services like yours post-COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, was virtually unspoken about until the pandemic. And I feel like the pandemic did a bit of a PR job for, long COVID did a bit of a PR job for ME/CFS. And I think as well, certainly within the medical community, it was something that was psychologized for many years. There was a lot of misunderstanding. I know there still is, but there's a lot more that we do know now. And of course, now a lot more funding is going into it, which is only positive. And of course, with long COVID and ME/CFS all kind of being lumped within that same category, all the research that's going to come out is going to hopefully benefit all parties. But yeah, it's definitely something I've seen an uptick since the pandemic, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go, Nicola.
If you had to, this might be challenging because of the personalization aspect, but if you had to give our listeners kind of one or two kind of starting points or actionable steps that they could, I think we've talked about kind of what food could look like but are there anything else that you would like to mention, or from that kind of more holistic aspect of kind of health and well-being as first steps for people that they can actually take away from the conversation?
Yeah, so I'll drill into nutrition a little bit and just expand on, because as I say, whilst I know everybody is different, there are certain principles, that are super important for us all to kind of think about as like principles and I guess foundations. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot is clients just not taking the time out to focus on meals and just really engaging with the meal in front of them. And again, this comes back to where it's so important to think about how we're eating, and of course that mindful relationship with food, because as of course we live in such a stressful world, a stressful food world. If we're constantly looking at devices and phones, TVs, screens whilst we're eating, we're more likely to just disengage in the food, but we're also not likely to digest as well. So people always talk about the first phase of digestion being, when you actually put the food in your mouth, but it's called the cephalic phase of digestion. It's when you actually look at the food, and it's when you smell the food. It's almost like when you walk in the kitchen when you were little, your mum's cooking something delicious, or you can smell it from down the stairs. You're like, oh, what's that? You already start to trigger salivary juices, enzymes, etc. That's going to help to anticipate in the breakdown of that meal that you're anticipating eating. So I always say, try and make meal times a ritual. Really look at the food in front of you. Avoid tech. Try and put your fork and knife down between bites, and just really, we talked about slowing down, slow down. So really focus on that mindful relationship between your food. And as you slow down, you'll obviously gain much more intuition in terms of your satiety signals. You're not likely to just continuously eat and then go for more portions thereafter, if you're constantly, consuming media. So it just helps you to, as I say, support digestion and gut health, but also support in terms of nutritional, daily energy intake, because you're not overdoing it as a result of distraction. So that's one key thing I always talk about. And a big thing just for kind of general, because I think sometimes, a lot of people know what a healthy diet looks like, and I can talk to you till the cows come home, or, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, all that. But really, I think, it comes down to intention and making sure that you've kind of set the right, boundaries in place for yourself so that you can actually start the week on a good foot. So one thing I always talk to clients about is really investing time. Perhaps it's a Sunday for you or a weekend. It depends obviously what your routine looks like, but really invest in looking at what the week ahead looks like meal-wise. And you'll feel so much better for it as you enter the week, rather than you'll feel chaotic. And often, chaotic eating episodes and mindless eating happens because we're not organized. It's not necessarily always resulted from cravings, for example. It's because we are feeling slightly, disorganized. We just opt for food that's around us. We're quite external. If something's sitting on the kitchen shelves or whatever, you just opt for it. So Sunday night meal preps, I think they're really important, because you're on the front foot for the week ahead, and it really helps in terms of you've got a plan in place. So it's about thinking about what meals, even if it's just 2 or 3 meals for the rest of the week, and then thinking about obviously what ingredients you're going to get from the shops, and then just investing 2 to 3 hours in really getting that all together. I think that's just super important, because as I say, it's all about that intention action gap, because people maybe have the intention, but they don't act. So what can really help make things easier for you is just set that aside in your diary, schedule it out. And then as you move into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, maybe you've got like 3 breakfasts, in the fridge in Tupperware, ready to go, portioned out. And then, it's just so much easier. So I think that's one thing that really helps with, habit change, is just making those little shifts in terms of intention.
Yeah, we have a family app called, I think it's called Any List, and it's great because you do a shared shopping list, so it doesn't matter who's going shopping. But also we're not actually very good at planning out our meals, but we plan out the kids' meals because we don't know who's going to be home to look after. And it actually, at least I know that they're fed, even if I'm not. I need to probably.
I was about to say, when you say anyone can go out, I'm not sure the 6-year-old's going to the shops, but I like the idea that they might be in the future.
Yeah, exactly. If we move the conversation on slightly, thinking about kind of, as we alluded to, the developments that are happening around longevity and health and tech and personalization, where do you see the future of nutrition? What do you see as the kind of upcoming, I don't like the word trends, but what's happening from a development point of view, even from a market or just more of an individual service level?
Yeah, I think certainly as we kind of move towards the future, I think this is only going to grow. And I think I definitely see a shift towards more kind of precision nutrition, which is obviously an area that I already embody, I already advocate. And I think obviously, with tech and data, I think people are now becoming a lot more open to the fact that, we can make personalized changes just off understanding how our microbiome looks, how our genetic looks, how that interacts with what we're, with that, how we can eat essentially, and personalize that towards what we're eating. I think there's definitely a lot more, in terms of awareness around sustainability, in terms of what we're eating, and making sure that we're kind of keeping that in mind with the health of our planet, and longevity as well. But I think, without wanting to kind of keep it all just about tech, I also would like to think that, we're starting to foster more of a connection between the mind-body connection, and really ultimately just delving down into that we are living in, as I mentioned earlier, it's such a stressful, chaotic food world. There is so much food choice. There's so many foods now that are packets and promises. I always say, ultra processed foods, which, aren't particularly beneficial for us in terms of longevity. So I would like to think that we are as a society becoming a lot more engaged with the conversation around nutrition, which I think is obviously definitely picking up momentum, and then really starting to kind of unfold and navigate that relationship with food in terms of how can we unpick, that stressful lifestyle that we live, and making sure that we put the steps in place to really support our longevity, rather than, and just understanding that, we have a real power and influence over our long-term health. We have the ability to ward off a lot of these chronic diseases that we're seeing today. So I'd like to think that would increase.
So, Lauren, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to hear from you about your key elements of what makes up good nutrition, and some really good, solid messaging there around, going back to basics and trying to cook from scratch where possible and when not possible, thinking about healthy choice options, the idea of planning your week like you might do for other elements of your life, whether that's your gym class or what your work routine might look like, or elements of social engagements that you might have. But the more planning you can do, that increases the quality of a good long-term outcome. And while there's lots of innovation coming in, it's all about thinking, what's healthy and what's natural. I think it's a lot of what you're saying, and also the fact you're linking in so much with other experts as well to really improve outcomes. And I think, as Richie said at the beginning of the first episode, it's wellness is a journey, and nutrition is a key part and a key pillar of that. And getting your nutrition right really has positive benefits, not only on your health and your longevity, but your ability to concentrate and perform on a day-to-day basis, going alongside with sleep and your mental health and the gut-brain axis as you spoke about. So thanks so much for your time today. We've really enjoyed it. We've got a lot out of it, and we hope our listeners have as well. And I hope people enjoy this episode. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Lauren.
No worries at all. Thank you. Cheers now.
That's the end of this week's episode. Thanks again to our kind sponsors, IBSA. Osteoarthritis is the leading cause of pain and disability in the UK. As our bodies age, there is a loss of naturally occurring hyaluronic acid within our joints, which can lead to reduced shock absorption and lubrication. This can contribute to the development of osteoarthritis, resulting in joint pain, stiffness, and difficulty carrying out daily activities, such as going to work and exercising. Synovial HL is a joint injection with the highest concentration of hyaluronic acid available in the UK, effectively restoring hyaluronic acid in the joint. It is scientifically proven to reduce pain and increase joint function, preserving your joint into the future. Synovial HL is injected in a simple procedure which offers an alternative to medication and surgery. If you'd like to find out more, please visit synovial.co.uk for full product information and a list of clinics offering synovial HL injections. Synovial. Move freely, live fully. Disclaimer. The procedure must be carried out by an appropriately trained healthcare professional.